Berkenda. I'm with the Orange Chamber of Commerce. I'm the Vice Chair of Events. So glad that you could join us this morning, whether on Facebook or if you're on Zoom. Couple housekeeping issues. Let me just get my screen over here. So if you are on our Zoom call, you'll want to make sure that your audio is muted. You'll also want to be clear that we are broadcasting live on Facebook, so also please make sure that your video is off. If you have any questions, we are definitely wanting to make sure this is an open format, so please type your questions in the chat on Zoom or in the chat on Facebook. We'll get to as many questions as possible. Today, I am so excited to welcome Orange County Sheriff-Coroner Don Barnes. Sorry about that, guys. My screen is doing something funky. 1 second. Technical difficulties. There we go. Okay. Sheriff Don Barnes was elected to the 13th Sheriff-Coroner for Orange County in November 2018. He began his law enforcement career with the Orange County Sheriff's Department in 1989. With 3 decades of service to the people of Orange County, Sheriff Barnes is well versed in the public safety needs of Orange County residents. As sheriff, Don Barnes is leading initiatives aimed at reducing the prevalence of drugs in our neighborhoods, enhancing school safety, mitigating the impacts of homelessness, and advocating for the restoration of accountability to our criminal justice system. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, Sheriff. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you.
Great, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. I wish we were doing this in the first person. I missed the breakfast part of it, but unfortunately COVID's kind of sent us all back onto these Zoom meetings. But I hope this is well received. I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Definitely. So over the past several months, with the stay-at-home order, businesses opening and closing during multiple phasings of going back and forth to the state, the potential for civil unrest, what is the current state of your many departments and biggest challenges for you as a sheriff right now?
Well, I can't tell you the biggest, they're all big. I think the most challenging parts of what we've gone through in 2020 started, of course, with COVID and how we had to change the way we delivered our services to the public in a way that safeguarded both the public and our staff, and we did that early on. As the year progressed, and I'll talk about these more in detail, but as the year progressed, we were dealing with obviously some of the civil unrest as a result of the incident that happened in Minneapolis with George Floyd. That became a national issue and discussion that followed. Mm-hmm. And then even before, during, and post all these issues, we'll be dealing with significant budget issues as we go forward, because we're already having some budget challenges in a strong economy. And then obviously through this, the way government functions through revenue, tax revenue, is going to be significantly impacted as we move forward. But excuse me, it's not COVID cough, by the way. I just drank some coffee a second ago. I have been tested several times, just so you know. Our employees are testing regularly, and I've been tested as well. I'm still here. I've tested negative. Mm-hmm. When we started dealing with the issue of COVID specifically, we made some advanced decisions before even COVID was even prevalent in the United States or present. That mostly had to deal with the way we delivered services, and it was done in a way to safeguard the community and our personnel. So we had changed some of our normally in-person services for patrol operations and other services within the Sheriff's Department. Mm-hmm. To be done over the phone. We had to close our counter operations in several areas of the department, so people couldn't come in and get some of the services they were used to. And our dispatchers were telling people if they called for assistance that it may be done over the phone, or to be prepared for deputies to be wearing a mask, or to meet them outside and to social distance, and all these things that were following CDC best practice guidelines. Unfortunately, in March, we had experienced our first several cases, and then on March 16th, we had, or about that time, we had our first case within the jail. As you are aware, we manage the Orange County jail system. It's one of the largest jail systems in the nation. It's considered a mega jail by all accounts, and we had to address that issue. We did it, I think, very successfully over time, but we did it with some some moves within the jail that put us in a much better position to navigate coronavirus. It was done by isolating those who had the flu-like symptoms that you might see, those that had either were sick, had a cough. We'd medically isolate them. And then anybody who was exposed to somebody inside the jail who had COVID, we were able to quarantine those individuals. And this is very important, I think, for your viewers in this and what we recognize. I think even before the general public was seeing this amongst the country, we medically isolated those inmates who were exposed to another person who had COVID, and we had the ability to do that. In order to do that, we actually had to create capacity within the jail. So we did release some individuals from jail. These were low-level offenders who were already sentenced. They had no other cases pending. And in essence, what we did was we just accelerated their release date by about a month or so, some up to 2 months early if they were at risk for medical conditions or age by CDC guidelines. And we released several hundred people to create capacity. Fortunately for me, our jail already had capacity because we're operating under our capacity, our limits. And that put me in a different position than other sheriffs throughout the state because we had room to create that social distance, if you will, within the jail settings and respond differently. But when we did that, at a peak, we had 220 cases within the jail. That was a high point that we had. We're moving down from there. But using that strategy and also quarantining every new booking that came into the jail, every new arrestee that came in the jail, we would quarantine also for 14 days.
Oh, wow.
But here's the interesting part. When we were quarantining those who were, or we knew knowingly exposed, obviously in the jail, we have a captive audience and we have ways of tracking where people are throughout the jail using an RFID system, a card system that tracks when they leave to go to a medical appointment or they go to eat their lunch or whatever it might be. They have to flag in and flag out so we know where they are. But that also allows us to know who else was with them. So if somebody was positive, we could go back and find out for that period who was with them, who was housed with them, and we could isolate or quarantine those individuals. But we recognized actually several months ago, and what the community is recognizing now, when we had those individuals in the jail who were exposed to somebody knowingly positive, and we tested after 14 days, all those individuals who were exposed, about 80% of those individuals tested positive. They were asymptomatic, meaning they had no symptomology, but they were positive for COVID-19. And that's why those numbers spiked. I think we recognized early on, and we shared this with the Board of Supervisors and through some press that we were doing, that the risk is a little different. We're recognizing just from our population that you can be COVID-19 positive and not have any symptomology. And for the community, and this is why this is important, for the community, there could be people walking about right now who are COVID-19 positive without any symptomology, who are simply moving this disease around. And that's very important. Through our safeguards and measures with cleaning solutions and masks, every inmate, every employee who worked within the jail was temperature tested, asked not to come to work if they had any illness. And our deputies and medical staff courageously came to work every day, knowing they're walking into an environment that had rampant COVID-19 at one point. And through those best efforts, we mitigated that population down to zero. We actually got our cases down from 220 down to zero. We had a little bit of an uprising again. It's about 30 or so within the jail. Most of those are new bookings though, people coming in off the street who are quarantining through that. But in our patrol operation, we did see a little bit of change. Our calls for service decreased significantly because most people were home. Unfortunately, when most people are home, that creates an environment where domestic violence may occur. So we were watching that closely week to week. About 2 months ago, we had a spike in domestic violence calls for service and also for child custody calls. Those calls where there's custody agreements between a divorced parents or parents who had common children. And those calls went up as well. So we mitigated those down. We had a really good, robust educational effort through our social media and other venues to try to educate people about what to do if they're having stress. This is a very stressful environment for everybody. We have to remind ourselves of that. When you have people who are home and they may be out of work and they may be stressed financially and they're trying to make it to the next month for rent, all those stressors manifest into the home in a different way. We wanted to make sure people knew how to get services, how to get relief, how to get to a shelter if it was that bad. And through those efforts, we were able to bring those numbers back down again. So we were very cognizant of that. Our jail population was reduced almost by half by efforts, not only through our efforts to release people. And I think this is important for you to know, and your viewers, when we say releasing people, it's not just a blanket release. We open the doors and just let anybody out. During times of crisis or declared emergency, the government code allows me great latitude legally on who I can release from jail under these conditions. And I wasn't going to just open the door and let people out wantonly without doing appropriate review, checks of who they are, and things like that. So using that analogy of the non-violent, non-serious offenders, either past or present crimes, having no pending cases, that was the safeguard of review that we went through. And we picked these individuals who were the low-level offenders already sentenced and those who were eligible to be released. And through those efforts, and those efforts are different than what was happening through the state zero bail. That was from the Judicial Council, came down through the court system, and they had a totally different review process on who was going to not come to jail or be released from jail. Mine were sentenced individuals that we were releasing. And that's kind of where we are now as far as our COVID response. We do manage the Emergency Operations Center, which is in the city of Orange, up on Loma Ridge, and that's something that is the sheriff's responsibility. Mm-hmm. The one thing, we're kind of beyond it now, but if you go back to the initial stages of COVID when we're responding, and this is what made this so unique for not only our county, but everyone else. When we're dealing with a declared emergency, and it could be something that could be an earthquake or a flood or a fire, generally those are centrally located issues. If we have a wildland fire, for example, we work with Orange County Fire Authority, and we are the emergency management system for the county. And then we have a regional system, which is Area 1, which is LA and Orange County. And how this works is requests for resources come up through the Emergency Operations Center for mutual aid. We put out our local resources will come, and then we go to Area 1, which is LA, if we have a need for additional resources. And then we go to California Office of Emergency Services in Sacramento and ask for resources. And then we go nationally if necessary. What made this very challenging for us was everybody was dealing with the same emergency. Everybody's requesting the same resources. Everybody had the same needs for masks and ventilators and personal protective equipment. And that made it very, very challenging because we almost immediately just took every available resource and put it into use. And that's what makes a pandemic so unusual. But we're able to get beyond that now. We do have the available PPE. We're trying to flatten the curve, obviously, and not overrun our hospital system with cases. All these things kind of go on this mathematical equation of how do we get through COVID-19. Most importantly, we have to follow the guidelines, which is wearing a mask, washing your hands, social distancing, staying home when necessary, all those things that are very, very important to help us get through this. I probably talked way too long. We may be at an hour already with that.
No, we're not at an hour. No, that was very informative. It does cover a couple of questions that people have already sent in for sure. One thing I wanted to ask you, and I noticed in looking at your website, your department, your division covers a lot. Like, just if you want to quickly tell everybody, what does the sheriff's office cover? It's like jails, courts, what else?
Sure. So it is a very large organization. The Orange County, as a sheriff's department, we're the 5th largest in the nation. In fact, some of the largest are right here in Southern California. Between obviously Los Angeles is the largest, Riverside, San Bernardino, San Diego, Orange County are in the top 10, and there's a few others nationally that are also large. Harris County, where Houston is, for example, is a very large sheriff's department. In that, though, we have a lot of responsibility. Our responsibilities are somewhat local in some regard, and they're county-wide in others. We patrol or provide patrol services like the City of Orange Police Department does to 13 cities within Orange County via contract. And all the unincorporated area within the county by statute is the responsibility of the sheriff. And if you're old enough to remember the old Thomas Brothers guides, and Berkenda, I know you're not old enough to know this, but if you know the old Thomas Brothers guides, that would be those little yellow areas on the map. All those yellow spots are unincorporated areas, and they still exist. We have Rossmore, for example, is an unincorporated area. Coto de Caza is unincorporated, Ladera Ranch, Silverado Canyon, those areas are all unincorporated. So we patrol or provide patrol services to about 800,000 of the 3.2 million residents. It's a very large responsibility. Beyond that, we have responsibilities at John Wayne Airport via contract, intercounty contract for John Wayne Airport, OCTA, and also the 3 harbors, which is harbors, parks, beaches, covers those as well. And then we have teams that have a countywide responsibility. We have 6 different narcotics teams, for example. And one of those is a majors team, highway interdiction team, a parcel interdiction team that comes through John Wayne Airport when people try to mail narcotics or send narcotics through the airline system or through cargo. It's also a very large responsibility. One of my favorite things to highlight, though, which is unique to Orange County, is the Orange County Intelligence Assessment Center, which is also located in the city of Orange through great cooperation and support by Tom Casella at Orange PD. We have a place that we work at, made available through them. And if you don't know what an intelligence center is, it's a fusion center. There are 80 of them nationally now. There was 79, there's now 80. And it's a vetting system for information or open source information that is turned into intelligence and helps us keep Orange County safe. Orange County is the only county in the state of California of the 58 counties that has our own terrorism fusion center. And it's morphed over time to be half terrorism and kind of all crimes, all hazards. So we have a large presence for domestic issues that we look at as well. And it's very, very successful. As a nation of all the fusion centers, Orange County last year was named the Fusion Center of the Year. It's second in product, in intelligence product, only behind New York. So wow. We have tiny Orange County with our footprint, and the only fusion center outperforming Orange County and how much product they put out for consumption across the nation is New York. That's a great compliment, I think, to the employees who work there and help keep Orange County safe. And there's a lot of other things. You can learn a lot about us if you go to our website, which is ocsd.org, and look at what we do. But it's a large organization. I love the relationship we have, not only with Orange County Fire Authority, but all the chiefs of police, including Tom Casella and the city of Orange. We often work laterally in support of each other. And I know the protests will come up eventually, probably as we go through this, but we are really the backbone of the support system for the local protests that took place. We participated in probably almost every city in support of the local law enforcement agency of those protests.
So yeah, one of the things I wanted to ask you, so back to your Thomas Guide comment, I, as a AAA member, AAA used to give them out. And so it was my mission to learn how to read it. So I do know how to read a Thomas Guide. Maybe I'm the only person who knows how to read it besides yourself, but I do.
I can read it when my eyes are much better. The font is too small now.
It is pretty tiny.
Yeah.
But you mentioned partnerships and lateral partnerships with local PD. I know Villa Park is under your jurisdiction, correct? It's Villa Park.
Mm-hmm.
So what type of partnerships do you have with Orange PD and how that works with Villa Park kind of being connected in Orange Park Acres, Nel Medina, and Silverado Canyon?
Well, most of that happens at the ground level with what I call the boots on the ground. The officers with Orange and our deputies assigned to Villa Park and the areas around Villa Park that are unincorporated. Oftentimes these officers, whether deputies or police officers, develop relationships and it becomes mutually beneficial. And I think this is important, especially when you look at how we deploy resources. So there's a very elaborate algorithm that we put out for, it's called an allocation of deployment model. An allocation is how many deputies, for example, it takes to meet the needs of the crime or whatever metrics you're measuring. And there's a formula for that. And then how you allocate them. So you have the deployment is how many, and allocation is how many, the deployment is how you put them into service. So if you have 20 deputies are needed for a city, how do you deploy them to meet the service demands? We went through this back in 2012 before we took over the contract for Yorba Linda. Yorba Linda was contracted with Brea, and there was an RFP that went out. We competed with several others, and we put an allocation deployment model in place. And that's probably way more detailed than you wanted in this, but there's a lot of math that goes into how we put people, and we just don't throw deputies out in the field.
Got it.
Deputy sheriffs are very, very expensive. Peace officers are very, very expensive. In fact, I could tell you, obviously, one of my responsibilities is the managing the budget. The sheriff's budget is about $1 billion fully aggregated, and 18% of that's county general fund expenditures. About $180 million the county gives us through our funding mechanism of local taxpayer dollars. Everything else is through contracts or grants or other revenue sources that come into the department. But when you get down to the ground level, oftentimes if you talk to one of those either officers or deputies working that area, they will have relationships they have formed. And they'll oftentimes back each other up. It's just kind of that code of making sure everybody goes home, including the public. That's rule number one. Everyone goes home, including the public we serve. That's a good day when everybody goes home. And so how they manage that, they oftentimes are on a first name basis. They know the areas based on how they border. And it's a good local relationship that takes place. And that happens throughout other areas of the county as well. Most importantly, though, if you go to South Orange County, I know that Orange is North Orange County or Central, but South Orange County, the 10 cities and that unincorporated area, everything south of Irvine down to the San Diego Orange County border is patrolled by the Sheriff's Department. It's almost like a regionalized police force. You oftentimes see those deputies assigned there. If they're assigned to Lake Forest or Mission Viejo, they'll bounce back and forth based on needs of the community. If there's a bank robbery in Mission Viejo, you'll see Lake Forest cars there, Rancho Santa Margarita cars there. Other cars will saturate and spike based on the need for demand for service, and then they'll go back. And next week it might be somewhere else. That allows us to staff at a minimal level because we can rely on other Sheriff's Department resources to come in and temporarily spike based on the needs and go back down, which results in cost savings to those communities who contract.
Okay. Yeah, you've got a lot of territory to cover. One thing I wanted to ask you, and this is something I know because there is so much going on, like you said, a lot of stress, perhaps anxiety, but there are a lot of good things going on. Is there a positive story that comes to mind, something, in the community that you'd like to share with us, with your department?
I think there's so many, it's hard for me. We actually put a video together a few years ago for our contract city managers, and I watched it and I was in shock at seeing all the great work. One of my favorite programs that we have in place, and there's several, and this may take up the rest of our time, but there's a program called 6 Points for Kids. And our deputies assigned to our custody operations created this program on their own. It's the 6 points of the Sheriff Star, and each point has a goal or objective they're hoping to meet for community engagement and involvement. And they created, that's one of my favorite programs. One of my recent programs within the jails is our veterans unit called Humvee, Housing Unit for Military Veterans, that we started at the beginning of the year. And that's at the Theo Lacey Jail, which is in the city of Orange. And it's taking those who served our country and may have fallen on hard times or made some poor decisions and saturating them with resources to get them back on their feet and tying them to sustained success when they leave custody with the hopes of not coming back. And we're actually trying to replicate that same model for every inmate in our custody.
Okay.
Everybody who walks through our jails gets contact with somebody. It's almost like a guidance counselor in high school. What can we do for you? How can we help you? What services do you have? Are you abusing narcotics? Can we get you into programs? And then once they leave, tying them to out of custody resources with the hopes of them not reviolating and coming back to jail. And that's the goal of breaking that system in many regard. One other program that I'm very proud of, in fact, two, that is funded through the Juvenile Justice Crime Prevention Act for decades, is our SMART team, the School Mobile Assessment and Resource Team. And these are deputies, an investigator, a sergeant, and a psychologist who handle everything on our school campuses that are threats or students who are acting out in a way that we can intervene, keep our schools safe, which is important. All 16 of the high schools in Sheriff's jurisdiction have a school resource officer on them. And it's the right person who knows how to deal with kids. But if we can get these kids back on their feet and help them not enter into the criminal justice system as a juvenile, which means they don't oftentimes enter into the criminal justice system as an adult, which is a win for everybody. And we have many other programs, but those are some, just to name a few. There is an attack on that funding, which really is concerning to me through the legislature. There's a bill that will require those monies that come through the Juvenile Justice Crime Prevention Act, 95% of those funds to be used for non-law enforcement, by non-law enforcement agencies. And that would decimate that program. That program has been so effective. It was put in place post-Columbine. That's a long time ago to think about Columbine, but we have intervened and interdicted on Columbine-like plots, taking bomb-making materials out of students' bedrooms, guns, knives, all these things that are necessary to give our kids a safe place to go and learn. And they should be entitled to that safe place to go and learn. But we just replicated that program in North Orange County with other municipal police departments. It was money made available. It was brought to my attention. And I said, rather than me take that money and capitalize on it for Sheriff's Department use, let's take this great program and replicate it so other jurisdictions can take advantage of this great program as well. And we also have a great intervention program for kids that's called the PRIDE program. It's through Pepperdine University using marriage and family therapists under the direction of a psychologist again. And they can come either through parents walking in with kids who are exhibiting some behaviors that are problematic or troublesome, referrals from schools or from law enforcement. If we have a contact that might be an arrest, we refer them to this diversion program, and through counseling, help them make better decisions, hopefully avoid completely entering into the adult system. And if you're not aware of this, every dollar we spend on juvenile programs and intervention programs like these saves $7 on the back end through the life of an adult program. Wow. By diverting kids into better decision making, avoiding them entering into the adult system. It takes an investment into that, and I think those are very good examples. I have more if you want them, but that may be enough.
I would love to do a whole hour of all the feel-good things for sure. But I did want to ask you about something that you just said. So you mentioned the programs and some diversions for kids kind of as they're at that pivotal point. With schools being closed, people are staying at home. Do parents and do your department still have access to those programs for those kids now?
No, well, it depends on how extreme the issues are. And you actually brought up a really good topic about those in crisis. And what we're trying to do, what we were getting ready to do before we had the second wave, was start opening up some of the counter services, start opening up some of these programs. Our drug education has ceased. Our deputies are very innovative, and our programs are very innovative. We're doing a lot of these programs just like this via Zoom. Students, teachers would have their classroom remotely log in from home, and we do drug education classes and decision-making classes and anything that's based on that type of thing. So we are looking at how we're going to do that. And in fact, through all of this, every crisis presents opportunity. And I think the opportunity that we're looking at as we're doing the after action review on how we navigated COVID-19 is, what did we do well? What did we learn about that we could do better? And what technology exists that we might be able to expand the deliverables on a much broader basis rather than having the face-to-face contact. Now that face-to-face is hard to replicate at times. I think there is maybe a balance, like they have these hybrid college courses. Some are in person face-to-face, and some are done remotely, and maybe a complement of both. We start with that first class being in person, and then maybe move to online format so that you can use our personnel as a force multiplier. There's a lot of opportunities. And one we learned about was courts. Navigating the courts through COVID-19 has been very challenging, but now we're looking at this through the Superior Court and Integrated Law and Justice, which is a JPA for technology projects for law enforcement. Every municipal agency is involved in it. I chair that group. How do we take technology and successfully implement it or replicate the successes we've learned through COVID-19 in a way that might make us more effective or more efficient, and maybe hopefully save dollars as well, because it's very expensive to do some of the labor intensive things that we do. And we're evaluating that as well.
Okay, very nice. That's good that those services are still available. I do have a couple of questions that are coming through the Zoom chat, so I want to just take a quick peek at that.
Sure.
First question, it says, Sheriff Barnes, would you explain how the traffic control works for the canyons and why the CHP is a control for speeding and other vehicle issues? Do you know how much the county pays the CHP for these services?
That's a great question, and most people are unaware of this, but the CHP by statute, we have the law enforcement responsibilities in unincorporated areas, but the CHP has the traffic enforcement and traffic investigation responsibilities for those. So I don't pay them anything for what they do. They're funded through the state. That's part of their mandated responsibilities.
Okay.
So the CHP has that. If there's something important though, and I think this is good for your viewers, because you have proximity to that canyon area, and a lot of people use those areas. But if there's an emergency, an accident, it doesn't matter who's responsible for it. We're all going to go based on our emergency response protocols. So you may see an officer from Orange, if it's proximate, respond out there for life-saving measures, or the Sheriff's Department, or the CHP, or the Fire Authority, or any other agency that might be able to go out there and help. But CHP has the responsibility for traffic enforcement, traffic investigation, accident investigation. And we have the responsibility for all the other law enforcement functions in the unincorporated areas.
Okay. I'm sure you knew this was coming. I see the mask in the chat.
Sure.
So it says, you've been very vocal about use of masks. What is your stance?
So that's a great question. And I want to be clear on this. And I think here's the one challenge that I have. And I don't have any issue with the governor, and he's got a lot of responsibility. He's got to make some critical decisions how to navigate this. But when I make a comment, unfortunately for me, my 3-minute explanation is narrowed down to 8 seconds on the news. And when I made the comment about, not being the mask police, it was not aimed at or intended to mean that masks are not important. Everything I've said about masks is masks are critically important. We learned this in the jail, as I just shared with you, that by requiring everyone to wear masks, we brought that number from 220, and it was going the wrong direction, down to 0, following all the protocols that I know work. I wear a mask when I'm out in public, and I expect my deputies to do the same. They follow the same guidelines, which is if they're socially distancing or if they're eating a meal, you can't eat with a mask on.
Correct.
I've had people send me a picture of deputies eating lunch and saying your deputies aren't wearing masks. Well, show me how you can consume a sandwich with a mask on. It's not possible. But I do believe that masks are critically important. I believe that, and the many other measures are important as well. What I have said about masks, and this is important to understand the difference, is that mask compliance is not a law enforcement function. If you just look at where we are today, post Minneapolis, and how difficult police community relations are, how strained they are, the one thing I'm not going to do is tell my deputies to go start out and physically arresting people for not wearing a mask. It's going 10 steps backwards from all the work we're trying to do to build relationships with the communities we serve in Orange County. And I think there's some issues with just that blanket interpretation of it's law enforcement's responsibility. We do respond out when we have calls. Businesses, for example, might be operating in defiance of the state order, the health order, or people calling if something's happening. This is also important to know. If there is a mask requirement, businesses are private property, they're private entities. And if you're in a shopping center, for example, a grocery store, and somebody in there is not wearing a mask, that is the management's responsibility to address. And if they say, if they address somebody who's not wearing a mask, say, sir, you can't be, or ma'am, you can't be in here without wearing a mask, unless it's one of the exceptions to masks, a health condition or something like that, they can ask them to leave. And if they refuse to leave, that's trespassing. That's trespassing on private property. That's a different violation of law that we will address. So, but we have been able to, through our efforts, negate down or solve the issues regarding masks by asking people to be compliant, by educating them. And in most instances, people have been able to be compliant. If we have businesses that are operating in defiance, we've done the same thing by asking them to please comply with the rules. And in almost every instance they have. And when they haven't, we've taken a criminal law report, a violation law report, and submitted to the district attorney's office for prosecution consideration. But we've been able to get everybody to be compliant. I think that's the most important part. Voluntary compliance is always where we'll go first. Education, I think, is important as well. And if you look at the areas patrolled by the Sheriff's Department, for example, and this was something I shared with the governor's office a few weeks ago, based on this media-driven perception that the governor and I were at odds over masks. And I was a staunch, nobody should ever wear a mask, and I'm never going to do anything about it, which was not true. And the governor's belief that we have, that law enforcement should be enforcing this, which nobody throughout the state, at the exception of Hollywood, was doing for a temporary period. And that's important to know too. But if you look at just the numbers, the data, in sheriff's patrolled areas, and I think this shows to our effort, in sheriff's patrolled areas of the COVID-19 positive cases, 10% are in sheriff's patrolled areas, and less than 5%, and any death is not good. I'm not saying that this is allowable or acceptable, but less than 5% of the deaths that have occurred are from people living in sheriff's areas. So I think it shows that we are having an impact on educating people, getting people in compliance, and hopefully for all of our good and benefit, stopping the spread of COVID-19 so we get back on that downward trend, right?
Right.
And get open as soon as we can. That's important. Continuity of commerce is part of the main functions of an emergency plan, if you look at how we work. The other issue, and I'll cover this real quick if you don't mind, the other issue that was difficult was when the health orders came out of the state, they were tied. There were 5 businesses, if you remember, that were precluded from operating, the in-restaurant dining, bars, gyms, and such. But that order was tied to what's called the CISO document. That's critical infrastructure document. And that's really a Homeland Security terrorism type document. But if you look at how contradictory this became and how difficult it was based on the subjectivity of the language, that CISO document says amusement parks should be open and sport venues should be open, and had a list of all these 16 different areas of commerce that should be, and government that should be up and operating. Well, it's contradictory to what a health order was hoping to accomplish. So when you have that type of subjectivity, and it makes it very difficult. That document also, by the way, says in paragraph 2, these are only recommendations and not intended to be mandatory. So when you have people saying all these things need to happen, I have to fall back not only on the law, the statute, the language of the law, or the letter of the law, but I also have to look at what we're hoping to accomplish here beyond that, which makes it, changes things a little bit for me and my deputies. The other thing is when you go out and enforce some of these things, some of these laws that may be unconstitutional, it's the deputy sheriff or the police officer who's subject to constitutional violations, not the entity. So I'm not going to put my deputies in a position to go out and enforce something that might be unconstitutional on its face, that subjects them to civil penalty for an enforcement of something that might not be enforceable. And that's going probably way deeper than you wanted to know about masks. Let me end with this. Masks are important. Please wear masks for the benefit of not only yourself, your family, your neighbors, your coworkers, the community at large. That's how we're going to get beyond this, by being responsible in how we move forward as a community.
Right. No, thank you so much for sharing that and explaining your department's stance on that issue. It's very important. Question, you brought up restaurants and the language of how that all works, but so many restaurants and now retail businesses have been approved to move their businesses outdoors. So we've seen like the Paseo style, the open air dining, al fresco. Has that brought about any new challenges? Like, are those open overnight? Like, what challenges has that brought to your department?
It hasn't really brought challenge to us. I actually think that's a good move, and if it's done responsibly, and where I have seen it done, I think it has done responsibly and consistent with, I think, the expectations of the government, and I say government at large, including myself. I was just at Watson's last Friday, right there on the Circle, and had a great sandwich, and everybody there I witnessed was doing everything they could to be compliant with, I think, the expectations of the health order, and that's a good thing. I think the bigger issue is there's several things, and I know we're talking to the Chamber of Commerce, but when you look at the impacts on commerce, what's, I think the hard thing when we had this opportunity to reopen, and many businesses invested capital to be compliant with the shields and other ways to make sure they can reopen, have that close back down. I know that many businesses are suffering. And if you look at some of those that aren't getting the CARES Act money, because, for example, the nail salons, which have people who are contractors. Right. Many of them aren't employees, they're contractors, they rent that space. Well, there's been no relief available for them. And all these smaller businesses, the mom and pop shops, are the ones that are going to suffer significantly. So I think anything we can do to pivot a little bit and give people the opportunity to bridge this gap responsibly is a good thing. And so we have been very supportive of that. I shared last week on a different venue like this. I think beyond that, people struggling, businesses not reopening, they've already been impacted so much, they're not going to reopen. And probably one of the greatest threats to local commerce is the split roll that's coming up. splitting retail and commercial, having them reassessed. And when these local businesses, which I support in my community, by the way, at the expense of a few dollars more, but if we don't support local commerce and local business, they're going to be consumed, overrun by the Walmarts and the Amazons. And I just think that's a bad thing. But when you look at the split roll and the impacts that will have on the budgets of these businesses when rents go up or property values go up, that has to be passed on to the consumer. You can't absorb that. If it's passed on to the consumer and makes them less competitive with the Amazons of the world, they just disappear. So picture your storefronts in orange with half of those businesses already being impacted by COVID, and the other half being impacted by split roll that will then make them unable to compete with, unless you have something that's so proprietary that you need to be local. Amazon can't deliver haircuts. We know when they may figure out a way at some point. I don't know. But some of those services that you have to have locally, but if you're looking at consumer goods, that is not going to be a good thing when we lose that local impact. And California by default becomes unable to compete on a national or even global basis because of the costs of taxes impacting everybody. And it's probably
I agree.
Sometimes I don't sound like a peace officer anymore. I sound like a businessman.
No, definitely. I know in Orange, we have our Support Orange, Shop Orange, or Shop Orange, Support Orange initiative to get people out there and spending those dollars among the local small businesses in town, just to further grow that mission and supporting the community.
Yes.
Question for you that has come up a couple times. I sit in a number of different Facebook forums and communities, and the subject of Kerry J. Smith. He is the child predator who was released. I think now it seems like it was a long time, but it was probably only about a week or so ago.
Yeah.
I did see just recently, I think it was Friday, he has been re-required to become a registered sex offender. I know your department has some sort of, I don't know if it's a watch program, but can you explain what that looks like from your area and what you guys are doing to help keep the community safe as far as predators like him are concerned?
Sure. So first, he will be required to register as a sex offender, and just for your consumers or the people viewing this, there's several steps he has to take to be able to be in compliance with that, and it's dependent on the city in which he resides in. He has to go and register, but part of that registration right now is contingent upon the completion of a live scan. If you've ever had to go for a job interview, a live scan is a confirmation of who you are and what criminal arrest records you may have. That, unfortunately, isn't operating right now by the state. So that's one provision that will prevent him from completing his registration. So he's not going to be on the Megan's Law website. But I think people know who he is already. That's a good thing. We do in the Sheriff's Department have a team called SONAR. It's an acronym for Sex Offender Notification and Registration. It's investigators that do nothing but track sex offenders. And when they're egregious or significantly at risk to the public, they actually walk communities and say, you have a neighbor who lives right there that you need to know about, and this is who he is, so that the community's well aware. That's a very extreme measure that we take, but it's got to be based on somebody who is significantly at risk of reoffending. This individual has some significant issues. We have looked at some of the statements that he has made. I think he suffers some mental illness. I'm not negating who he is. I'm just saying that there are compounding issues with this individual that we have to be cognizant of as we move forward. But the one advantage that we have with this individual, Mr. Smith, is everybody knows who he is. I think probably if you look at the newspaper or the media, you know what he looks like. People are aware of where he lives or resides. So all those things are an advantage to us. And I think it puts us in a better position. It doesn't change the risk of him, but it does give us the ability to at least know who he is, where he lives, and what he looks like.
Right. Okay, perfect. Thank you. I also know August is coming up just around the corner. I can't believe we're already kind of heading towards, I guess, the back end of the summer. And one of the things that the community always looks forward to, at least as far as I'm concerned and have heard around town, is the National Night Out.
Yes.
I think is that normally this first week of August, second week of August? It's
coming up rapidly. And unfortunately, we're going to have to, like many things we've done through COVID, is come up with some different way to experience that. And I know we're trying to still do the same things and have the same support from our community and and restaurants or whatever that might be. We're just not sure how that's going to happen. So we don't want to lose the momentum or a national night out. It's going to be done in some other way in which we deliver it. I just don't know what that's going to look like yet. We're still trying to be optimistic. I don't want to sound, too Pollyanna-ish, but everything that we see just weeks away, we know we're going to have to change into some other experience.
Right.
And so we still have that ability. We're trying to make it as well received and enjoyable as it can be. It's just not going to be probably in the same format.
Okay.
But, those are all dependent upon obviously local involvement, which you would have in the city of Orange, but it's just not going to be the same. And we're not going to probably have anything through almost the remainder of the year that's going to be what we're used to because of COVID until we get beyond this. So once again, let's try to get beyond it as quickly as we can and reopen all these things responsibly so we can get back to normal. I know every parent that has kids wants them to go back to school. There's tremendous impacts throughout all of this. And it's hard. I heard one family shared with me, they're both teachers. The parents are both teachers and they have their kids at home. So I said, we have to teach our kids at home and teach remotely the kids in our classrooms. So they're getting impacted twice through this. And it's been very challenging for all of us. I will tell you this, I don't think any of us will ever forget the year 2020. I know I think we all want to forget the year 2020. But
we won't. Not anytime soon.
Yeah, I want to redo. I want to start over in 2021. I can tell you that at least for this county, we have done some phenomenal things moving forward and how we've navigated this. I think we've done a good job, but that's only because of the support and involvement and cooperation of the community. And that's going to help us get through this, I think, more than anything else.
Well, I have one more question. I know we're headed towards this very last spend a few minutes. I want to be cognizant of your time. What can the public do to support your department?
That's a great question, and I appreciate that. I think there's several things that we can do. First, everything starts with dialogue. When you look at what we've gone through with the civil unrest and some of the impacts that have happened because of Minneapolis, let me just start with, I may have been the first law enforcement professional to speak out against what I saw in Minneapolis. I put out a statement within a few days and said that was wrong. I've never seen that as a technique. We don't do that in Orange County. I say in Orange County holistically, including the law enforcement agencies. We trained over 70 municipal police departments, including the Sheriff's Department with our academy in both LA and Orange County. So that's not something we've ever trained to or condone. But I think when you look at where we are today with police community relations, that we appreciate you. Thank you for your service comments that are oftentimes happening in the public is very, very important. We should always hold our people accountable, and I'm an advocate for accountability. We have, for example, this is what I think has been challenging for me as some of the national movements on the defund the police or the 8 Can't Wait campaign, which 8 things we have to do to make law enforcement police reform and some of these things. And we have done when they can't wait, for example, we have suspended the use of the carotid control technique. For anybody who's ever seen mixed martial arts, that's a legitimate technique to get somebody into submission, short of using other force like lethal force or injuring force. So it's not what happened in Minneapolis. It's not what happened to Eric Garner. And that's not the technique that happened in New York. It's a very highly trained technique. In fact, it's the only aspect of our academy we have to score 100%. 95% is not good enough. You have to do it perfectly in order to use that technique. We've suspended that. We only used that 4 times in 2019 in the Sheriff's Department. With all those contacts that we've had, over 300 and almost 360,000 contacts that we've had with the public, we only used that 4 times. It only worked twice. So for me, it was a different risk. I didn't see it as being that critical to retain it. But the other thing that your public, that your viewers may not be aware of all those contacts, 356,000 plus contacts, we had only 421 uses of force. That's really low. That's significantly low. That's 118 per 100,000 contacts with the police resulted in a use of force. And use of force by our definition is anything beyond controlling the person, putting them in a handcuff. So if you have to grab them and take them to the ground with a control hold, that is a use of force by definition. That's really, really low. The other aspect that I think was a little troubling to me, and not that people just don't know, because Rather, they have an opinion of what we have to do without asking the questions first. What are you doing? Let's start with what are you doing in this regard? And I heard many times that we never hold our people accountable. There's no accountability in law enforcement. That is not true. In 2019, last year, we had 126 internal affairs cases that we did within the Sheriff's Department. And those were on almost 200 people that work for me. What your viewers may be shocked to hear, of those 126 cases, 84% of those cases were started by my staff recognizing behavior that they believe didn't meet the standards of the Sheriff's Department. We police our own. And if you have conduct that rises to the level where you shouldn't work here anymore, we separate you from employment. And I'm not saying this proudly, but we've gotten really, really good at firing people. And if you don't meet the standards of the Sheriff's Department or the public that we serve, we will walk you out of this industry and you don't get to work here anymore, and have no problem saying that. But here's the thing that I think is most troubling to me. And I've been an advocate for, when you hear defund the police, defunding the police is not really advocating for, some are, and some jurisdictions are doing this. It's really advocating for funding programs that don't exist. If you like the way that we're being impacted, including in Orange, because I mean, Tom Cassell and I, your chief, have conversations all the time on these topics. Law enforcement, when somebody's a mental health crisis, the first person they interact with should not be somebody in uniform wearing a gun and a badge. But those intervention strategies don't exist. Those programs are non-existent in California. They've not been adequately funded through the state. And it's not only law enforcement, it's the local hospitals that are being impacted. Chalk Hospital and others are being impacted in the triage areas. There are people in mental health crisis are being taken to hospitals designed for physical trauma, medical trauma, and they don't have the ability to meet the needs of these people. Up until a few years ago, in a county the size of Orange, 3.2 million residents, there were 10 crisis stabilization beds for adults up until a few years ago. 10 beds for people in mental health crisis to go to, get stabilized, and then get treated. That's unheard of. You may know, heard of the Be Well campuses, the Be Well campaign, Be Well OC. And Be Well as a campus, it's in Orange. It's opening up probably within the next 12 months, and it's going to be in the city of Orange. There's other campuses like it being planned throughout the other areas of the county. And this will allow people in crisis to go and get services before they decline to where law enforcement has to respond. And we're working through that. The Orange County Jail is the largest mental health hospital in the county. Before COVID-19, 40% of the individuals, or 2,000 people in my care, had a daily nexus to mental health treatment. Okay. It's increased 60% over the last 5 years. And knowing that, and I've said this publicly, if we're going to be a mental health hospital, then we're going to be a good one. And we changed the way our service deliveries are occurring within our custody operations to treat people with mental health issues, to get them into stability, getting those who are suffering from substance use disorders like alcohol and or drugs, which is about half of my population, by the way, has a nexus to alcohol or drugs. Any given day, I have 100 to 120 people who are detoxing, medically supervised detoxing off of alcohol and or drugs, to the tune of, now we're dealing with them with MAT, medicine assisted treatment. You may have heard of it. Yes. It's costing me $2 million a year. I have about 550 people in my care receiving MAT, medicine assisted treatment. And all this is being done with the goal of getting them into stability. And when they leave my facilities, getting them into some other program or support system that prevents them from declining, keeping them mentally health stable, keeping them in sobriety, getting them out of homelessness into housing in a way that prevents them from coming back in the front door of my jail. That's the goal. If we can stop that cycle and fund these programs over time, we may be able to look at the jails if we can right size the jail population and bring the jail population down where people aren't coming back to jail. Then there may be cost savings opportunities. Right. But you don't turn off law enforcement on Friday and then turn on these public services, mental health, substance use disorder treatment, homeless issues on Monday, and just, it doesn't happen over a weekend, it happens over time. And I've been advocating for this for years. So when I hear the defund the police, it's really advocating for funding the other programs necessary, right, to prevent law enforcement contacts with people who are in some form of crisis or some struggling through some ways like homelessness and things like that. So I went on way too long probably with that last question of what people could do. But I think the one thing in that,
It's
and
important.
hopefully through this, I've given you information that maybe informs you a little bit better on what's happening here in Orange County, what's happening in the jails, what's all the efforts that's being put forth. And when you hear things like defund the police, 8 can't wait, by the way, we've done all those years ago. All those 8 things people are saying, this is what you have to do.
Right.
My response is, I agree. We've done those all years ago. We are way beyond that as a county. And I think that's good for people to know.
Well, thank you again for advocating for the community and also for everything you're doing for the businesses and local areas around us. We appreciate your coming on today. And I wanted to go ahead and pop up a screen so everybody has the contact information for your department. One moment. So here on the screen, everyone, I have the contact information for the Orange County Sheriff's Office. It's the www.ocsd.org. I have popped on there a number of times over the past several weeks. There is a lot of information about the department and all the cities that they serve. So go ahead and pop on there if you guys have any questions for that department or for Sheriff Barnes. Let me go back here. Sheriff, thank you.
Thank you so much.
To the rest of our community, we have a couple things coming up. So we are going to be dark for eggs and issues in August due to us having 2 candidates forums. So keep an eye out on our website and also on Facebook for that information, dates and times. In August, we also have 2 business networking group lunches. Those are going to be virtual, of course. So get your lunch and pop on to the Zoom call with us. That's going to be on August 5th and on August 19th. Our next eggs and issues is going to be in September. So take a look for that coming up soon. We'll probably post that information in about 3 to 4 weeks. Thank you again, Sheriff. Thank you, community, for joining us. And we will see you all very soon for our forums. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great day.